What's up, everybody? Welcome back to our channel, For Collectors, a channel that's for collectors. I'm Theo. You guys haven't seen me in a little while. I had a couple vacations and a couple other things going on, but I'm excited to be back on the channel. And I have a collector to collector that I haven't done a collector to collector in a while, and I miss doing them. So today I'm going to be sitting down with John Mangini. His channel, as you guys know, is called the Mangini Collection, and it should be a lot of fun. So let's hit the intro.
Welcome to For Collectors.
All right, welcome, John. Thanks for coming, man.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited. I saw I made a tiny little cameo in your opening.
Yeah, you
Pepino Man.
Pepino Man. Yeah. Well, you are actually on our channel a good amount. You do either the collaborations on Sundays, or Sammy's had you on a lot of times. So
Yes, with Orlando mostly. Yeah.
yeah,
A lot of fun.
this is cool because me and you have never got to talk one-on-one on camera. We've done a couple collaborations on other people's channels and stuff like this, but this is the first time we're sitting down together. So this is really cool. So
Yeah, that's true.
We're both from Pittsburgh. When did you actually move out of Pittsburgh area?
I moved out the end of 2003.
Okay.
Yeah, and established myself here full time in 2004.
Okay. Do you get to come back here very often? You still have family in the area?
I used to come back a lot. I lost a lot of my family pretty quickly, actually. So pretty depressing, but
Yeah.
I do still have family and friends there, and I don't get back as often as I like. I still miss it. I still love it every time I go back.
That's awesome. That's good. So the first part of this conversation is going to be more of what's going on right now with the hobby. The second half of this interview, I'm going to talk to John more about his origins of starting collecting and a little bit more about childhood and things like that. Let's just start off with an easy one. How long have you been on YouTube, John?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I started 2018 or
Okay.
19, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and you said you kind of started, like a lot of us start by watching other channels and kind of being like, okay, I'm going to take the plunge. You kind of started blindly. You were like, oh, like there's not very much card content on here. I'm just going to jump on. Isn't that kind of how you started?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm like the opposite of everybody else because now I'll have people reach out and say, "Hey, I've been thinking about starting. I see all you guys. I want to, jump on and do it." With me, I didn't know there was any kind of card community on here. I never even thought to jump onto YouTube to look at cards. To me, I was doing that on Facebook a lot because
Yeah.
it just seemed like more of a picture kind of a thing rather than a video kind of a thing. So it just the thought never really crossed my mind. And so I would put, I had a put all my cards. I have a Facebook page, the Mangini Collection, and I made albums and put pictures of all my cards and started joining Facebook card groups and buying cards on there. I sold some when I first started, selling off some doubles and so forth. And so I had that page, and I made a couple videos to put on there. And as an afterthought, I had I had one video on YouTube for something totally unrelated, and I'm like, I will, put these on YouTube. Nobody's ever going to see them, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I started. And it wasn't until I got a shout out and started getting subscribers and comments that I even knew there was a YouTube community on here.
It's nuts. So
I was totally blind.
So what's your wife? You talk about her sometimes on the channel. What she think about your YouTube fame? Like, are you guys ever out and about and somebody, says they recognize you, or do you constantly get text messages and she's like, "Who's that now?" Like, what she think about all this?
Yeah, she may be a little annoyed at how often I text with fellow YouTubers, which is like throughout every day, all day, as you know, Theo.
Yeah,
And she's always
exactly.
like, "Are you texting with your boyfriends again?"
Oh
But
man.
it's fun. I think she gets a kick out of it because we go some places and people will recognize me or stuff like that. I know my dad went to a card shop, and he was his friend had some kind of art piece or something, and he was looking around for appraisal or something like that. And he walked in and he asked the guy if he knew me, and the guy said, "Well, come back here." And he took him in the back room, and he was playing one of my videos at the time he walked in. So my
Nuh-uh.
dad got a kick out of that. And then I have a cousin in Pittsburgh, and she was telling me that her boss watches, and she said she walked in one day, and he was like, "You need to check this guy out," and she's like, "That's my cousin." So there's all these. You hear these kinds of little stories, and it's fun. It's fun. I
Yeah.
get a kick out of it.
I mean, when I was trying to hook up with you at the National this year, you had a couple guys talking to you and things like that, which is obviously normal. But do you feel like every year at the National, because you were at Chicago last year, do you feel like more and more people stop you and talk to you, or has it pretty consistently been the same?
This year was way more, Theo, way more. And I couldn't help but think, because I didn't it was difficult to shop. Like, I didn't get through the floor as easily. And I couldn't help but think, because I'm such a small channel, that these big channels, they must not be able to go anywhere. And of course I'm accessible. I want to talk to everybody. I want to meet everybody. And that was the most fun part of the whole National for me. So I don't care. I'd rather do that than look at cards, to be honest. Could buy
Yeah,
cards anywhere, right? I can't meet everybody
right.
anywhere. So but I just couldn't help but think, the large channels, they must the people that are really well known, can't imagine what it's like to be one of them. They probably get stopped every 2 minutes.
I can definitely see that. So, what is most people that stop you and they just watch the channel? What's like a consensus? What do they usually say to you?
Usually, they just want to say, they watch the channel, they enjoy what I'm doing.
Yeah,
I got a lot of people that say, "Hey, keep up your rants. You're a voice of reason for the hobby. You need to keep saying what you're saying," which kind
yeah,
of surprised me because when I do those, not everybody agrees with me. So
yeah,
it was nice to have that kind of support. And I got stopped by a lot of people that don't comment, right? So these are people that are watching, and what's nice about it is when you feel like there are people relating to what you're saying, you
yeah,
know, and you're not just talking to the air out there.
yeah. I mean, I think
If
you
it
relate.
resonates, it means so much more if you feel like you're resonating.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like I used to teach college, and I always had the attitude that if I just if I make a difference in one student's life, then it's worth it.
Hmm.
Just one student. So to feel like you're resonating with anybody, if I can make a difference to some young person watching, or influence somebody positively, then it's all worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you resonate with all ages. I do, but I honestly, as far as like people that interact with you, I feel like there's a lot of baby boomers. At one time, I said John's like the Pied Piper of the baby boom collectors out there. I mean, do you agree with that? That for whatever reason, you do resonate a little bit more with the baby boomer kind of collector out there, or you don't see that?
Well, Theo, I think I do, because I speak my mind,
Yeah,
and I speak the way that my generation has always spoken.
yeah,
Things that don't make sense to me that happen in the world don't make sense to other people that grew up when I grew up,
yeah,
because it was a different time, and they can certainly relate to me, and I can relate to them, right?
yeah,
Um, I hope that, and I know I have younger viewers too. Just, I'm sure not the same number of them.
right.
The other thing is I tend to, even though I collect all sports and I collect all eras, including modern, I tend to show my vintage stuff almost exclusively, and I show mostly baseball. And that is because that is where I think the need is mostly for education, because there's so much out there. Newer people getting into vintage are overwhelmed. They many times don't know where to begin. And even the people that are seasoned collectors that watch me, the number one comment I get is, "I've never seen that before." you showed me something I've never seen it before again.
Yeah.
That's the overwhelming comments I get, and I love that. And I love when I'm watching videos and I'm seeing stuff I haven't seen before. If I go to the National, I haven't seen it before, then I want to buy it because that's always what I've been drawn to. It like opens up a whole new world for you when you discover these new sets and so forth. And
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm educated enough on new cards or take enough of an interest to even be able to speak intelligently about the short prints and this and that. And I don't really follow it. And there are plenty of people that do talk about modern cards. It's like, what am I going to tell you about modern that you probably don't already know? And so I that's pretty much why I stick to vintage. That's my first love and what I know the best.
Yeah, and I honestly, John, I think I like your channel the most because of the vintage education you give on different sets. There's really not a lot out there as far as talking about some of the oddballs. I know you don't like the word oddball, but the non tops traditional cards and educating people on it, and also you have to have that entertainment value, and I think you bring the entertainment value to bring people to the table to listen. So I feel like the best trait you have, in my opinion, is your education. But I'm sure everybody would have a different opinion. You know what I mean? But
well, I appreciate that because that's what I shoot for.
yeah,
And and I particularly like to talk about old obscure players who may have had some impact in
yeah,
sports and who was good. Many of them were very good players, but a
yeah.
lot of people don't know about them. Even some more obscure Hall of Famers, your guys like Chick Hafey and those kinds of guys. And so that's what I try to bring to the table, and it interests me if I learn about a new guy.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will see a card and I like the card, and I'll see the player, and I'll say, "Hey, let me look up this player," and I'll learn something about him, and then I want to share that. And I do share a good bit about modern players too when they're up and coming, when they just did some milestone that I think is important. I'll talk about that as well.
So talking about how you've caught on a little bit around the card community, has anybody ever come up to you or emailed you or reached out to you that you were actually surprised they were a little bit more famous, and you're like, I can't believe that person knows who I am?
Um, I don't think so.
No.
I mean, I was surprised when the Card Life reached out to me to be on there.
Yeah, that was pretty early on, right? That was like 2 years ago, or was it?
Yeah, it was a couple years ago. And Sports Collectors Digest, I was surprised when they reached out to me to do an article. But that's about it. I don't think anybody else has really surprised me.
Okay.
I don't have huge people reaching out to me.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Misfits. So, everybody that knows you knows about the Misfits. So I guess that was prior to me jumping on YouTube. Like, around when did that all start up, and who gave you guys the name? Like, what's the origin of the Misfits?
That started at the third national ago in Atlantic City. The
Okay.
last national that was in Atlantic City, we all got an Airbnb together. And a few years ago, back in 2016, I had gone up to Baltimore to work in my profession, and they had a kind of a troubled project that needed turned around. That's what I do. And I had all these kind of younger people. Many were newer in the industry. Some really had bounced around a little bit, and everybody was everywhere. People were in positions that weren't best fitted for them, so I switched everybody around, and I kind of took them under my wing, and I called us the Misfits, and we just started outperforming everybody. And to see everybody's the look on their face and the pride that they took once we started to do a great job. So I took pride in calling us the Misfits. Like we were this merry band of misfits that got together and really did a great job. And so when we got together, we all came from kind of different backgrounds. Some of us older, some of us younger, some of us more into modern, some vintage. And I don't know. I just started calling us the Misfits, and it stuck.
Nice. So would you consider yourself the leader of the group?
No, I don't think we have a leader.
I was trying to see if you get yourself in trouble there.
No.
You did take the bait. So all the Misfits, 100%. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about how you collect. So I would say me and you collect very, very differently, other than the fact we both collect baseball players and love Clemente. I'm very much laser focused on certain cards. I'm trying to accomplish one goal, you could say. And it seems like you're all over the place. You do, like you said, you do modern, you do football, you do hockey, you do pre-war. So my big question to you is, do you feel like somebody like me is missing out on what the hobby can provide by being so focused?
No, I don't think anybody's ever missing out on collecting what they want to collect. And we all need to be true to ourselves and what we enjoy.
Okay.
I don't think anybody should go start collecting something they just because somebody else tells them to.
Yeah. So the way you collect actually stresses me out, and I know it doesn't stress you out because it's actually makes you feel good. So walk me through how you search for cards, like, because you're all over the place. So I'm trying to think here. Do you just go on eBay and you just one day you type in Babe Ruth cards, one day you type it, like, I'm just very confused about how you hunt for cards.
Well, that's a good question, but I started so long ago, and
Yeah.
I have so many cards that I started off with baseball mostly. I had football cards growing up. Even remember having a few hockey and basketball cards growing up, but mostly baseball. And I was a baseball fanatic and a baseball card fanatic as long as I could remember. So that was my focus. That's what I played, when I was a little kid. Um, and I wanted to have all the great players. So, I used to read baseball books and I knew the old players. And then my dad would tell me about them too. And then my dad would tell me about old football players. So then if I would see their card, I'd want to get their card if I recognized them. So that's kind of how I started buying cards when I was little, other than in the packs. You know, we had a flea market and it was down the hill from me. And I'd walk down there every Sunday with a friend. And we would just go through there, and I would buy up the old vintage players that I recognized. And back then it was baseball. I don't remember, buying other sports at that time. But as I matured with my collection and my collecting, and as I got older, I wanted to have the other great players too in the other sports. And so I I I, I kind of view it as I use the analogy of music. I love all music. I listen to opera, classical, rap, R&B, rock and roll, you name it. And I
Yeah.
would get on these kicks. I'd get on a rock kick, and so I'd listen to that for a few months. I get on an R&B kick, or I get on a jazz kick, and that's kind of how I am with my collecting. It keeps it nice and fun and interesting for me. And then, of course, we have the different seasons. So if you collect modern, during baseball season, you're focused there. Now we're going to start shifting into football season.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're into Olympic cards, you could be buying something like that now.
Yeah.
So that keeps it interesting for me, is the constantly shifting focus and getting into little things here and there.
Okay. I'm following you there. That makes sense. You kind of focus in on what you're thinking about at that time. That makes sense to me. So I could see that. So you said you just walked into the National and you had no card that you were like had to get. You just walked in there and you're just like, but the card comes to me, it comes to me, and that's how you went in there, right?
I can honestly say, out of every card show I've ever been to, any card show, not just the National, I shopped the least this year. I
Mm,
really didn't look at a whole lot of cards.
yeah.
I was there mostly to mingle and meet people and hang out.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And I got stopped a lot, and
Yeah.
I would talk to people for half an hour. Some of them we'd, have a drink, whatever. And so I really didn't shop all that much, but I picked up a few nice things.
Nice. So let me ask you a question about the hobby. So become too focused on condition over owning the card, or do you think that's untrue?
Well, so that's kind of a loaded question because I think it depends on your perspective and what's important to you. The way I collect, yes. Like I'm
Okay.
not, I don't look at my cards under a loop. I don't treat them like they're diamonds. And the cards that I pull out of a brand new pack really don't care if PSA thinks they're a 10 or a 9. Don't care. Can't tell the difference. That's for
Yeah.
me. That's for me. But that's the way the hobby is now. You got to have those 10s as long see, PSA controls the hobby now. And anybody that says they don't is I think missing it,
Yeah.
because they do. They control it. It's mostly it's for a number of reasons. Number one, anytime there's money involved, and if 10s are going to sell for 10 times as much as 9s, then that's always going to be important. Number two, you have the set registry, which keeps people there. So you're talking about greed and you're talking about ego, and you can never fight that. And we have witnessed PSA time and time again. No matter what they do, they get, everybody ignores them, whether it's the PWCC scandal or whatever, grading fake this, fake that. It doesn't matter. They are in control.
Yeah.
And the young collectors only do PSA, and they have been indoctrinated into that. The Jeff Wilsons of the world and the PSA 10s and the money and all of that. They're indoctrinated in that from day one. See, when I started collecting raw. PSA didn't exist,
Right.
So I come from a totally different perspective. And since I'm mostly a vintage collector, you're not going to find those in 10s. So you can just put that out the window right now, right? Like pre-war stuff. And if you do, they're going to be $10 million. So it's just a matter of perspective. But I believe that PSA controls the hobby, and I believe they will continue to.
Yeah.
No matter what I think or say.
Yeah. So let me just give you two scenarios. I'm curious to hear your opinion on it.
Mhm.
You have two cards in front of you. They're the same card. One of them both of them are raw. One looks packed fresh, 75-25 centering, perfect corners. The other one has the same image quality, 55-45 centering, and has 4 rounded corners. Which card do you prefer to own?
Okay, so I would have to see the card because it totally depends on how I feel the card looks.
Okay.
Because I have bought off-center cards that I just speak to me, and I like the look of them. But I would probably go with the 45-55 centering that you mentioned there, probably, but
Okay.
not in all cases.
Okay. I'd probably go with the pack fresh looking card, 75-25 personally. Hey, if you want to comment down below which option you'd go with, I know what Dylan would go with. That's
Yeah,
for
well,
sure.
like I said, it's not always the case. Sometimes, sometimes I see off-center cards and they just look so good to me, and I want it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Cards to me have a feng shui about them, and there's a certain card that just speaks to you. And I routinely buy lower graded cards, not because they're less money, because I like the look of them better.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 3 in front of me here that I bought, and there was a 4.5 I was bidding on, and I regretted bidding on it. Thank God I got outbid, because I stumbled on the 3 after I bid on the 4.5, and I thought the 3 was way nicer card.
Nice.
So that's the one I ended up. After I got outbid, I was able to pick it up and pick it up a lot less money. So that was good.
Oh, good. All right, let's switch gears now. You already kind of alluded to a little bit about growing up and things like that. So let's take a time machine back to where you grew up. So I actually, knowing you and talking to you, I already know the answer, but could you tell everybody kind of where you grew up and what the town was like at that time when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up not far from where you are. In fact, my best friend in college lived near you, and
Yeah.
I traveled there all the time. I used to joke around because that town is nothing but churches and bars. It's like a church, a bar, a church, a bar.
And I live next to a church.
Yeah, and it's such a that tiny little main street. So I grew up out in the country,
Yeah.
and in farm country, and of course it doesn't look like that now, but it was all country. We had a path through the woods, and that's where I would walk down to the convenience store to buy my packs of cards, and that's where I would walk down to the fire hall to go to the flea market to buy my old cards. And that was Youngwood, PA. I had a Greensburg address, but because I was out in the country, my address was Greensburg, but I played ball in Youngwood, and Youngwood was the town that I could walk to. And of course, that's George Blanda's hometown, and the main drive there, the main highway through there, 119, is they changed the name when I was little to George Blanda Boulevard. That's what that's called now. And it was, man, it was just, and it's changed a lot, I have to tell you that. But when I was growing up, it was just your average little town of families and safe, and you never worried about locking your door or anything.
Yeah. So tell me, you talked a little bit about baseball. What other sports did you guys play in the neighborhood growing up?
We played everything. We had a country road, and a neighbor put up a basketball hoop. And when basketball season would roll around, we go out there and play. And I remember being out there in the snow. We would play in the snow. My hands would be so numb I could barely shoot the ball. And then we had a big field up top, and we would play football up there. It was a huge field, perfect for football. We would play tackle football up there, and then we had a field down below, and we used that as our baseball field. We had a different field for everything. And we had this reservoir on the other side of our football field, and it was concrete, but it looked like a stadium inside. It was all cracked. It was an old reservoir, grass growing up through the cracks, rocks everywhere, and we would go in there and play baseball. And it was the dumbest thing you could ever do, because that ball would hit a rock and hit you in the head. And, it would come off the cement like 180 miles an hour. But it looked like, we felt like we were in a stadium. It was so much fun to play in there.
That is awesome. Me and my neighbors used to play home run derby, because my neighbor had a tall picket fence. So there was only three of it. It was me and him and his brother, and we would keep score all summer long. So like every day we would play, like you get 10 outs, and we kept track of standings. Well, the one day my buddy hits the ball over the fence and through the neighbor's window. So we ran in the house. Next thing you know, the neighbor walks over, and that was the end of the home run derby after that.
I have all kind of stories like that, man. We played home run derby. I played home run derby into my 20s with the neighborhood guys. We had, like I said, I grew up in the country, so we had this big front yard, and then I would wrap up the bat. I would tape that up, and we would tape up the wiffle ball so it could go a little farther.
Okay.
And the home run was over my neighbor's house, and they were close friends of ours. So you would hit it over there to the road, like past through my whole yard and through my whole other neighbor's yard. And we would play that for hours on end. And we would actually try to strike you out. Like I had as much fun pitching as I did batting.
Wow.
And because you can make that ball do all kind of crazy stuff. And we would you got 3 outs, and anything that wasn't a home run was an out. If you swung a miss, that was an out. If you popped it up, that was an out. So it was tough.
Yeah.
And I remember one time playing pepper in my front yard, and I hit a ball, and it went right through my front window. And we had this big driveway that went way down around, and I would throw the ball. I had this rubber baseball, and I would throw that against the house for hours on end and catch it. And I'd throw myself grounders and fly balls and this and that. And one day the garage door was open, and I would throw it right above the garage door all the time. That's where I would throw it. Yeah. And I threw it this one time, and it just missed hitting the wall, and it skimmed the top of the garage. And wouldn't you know it, there's one light bulb there, and it goes through and smashes that light bulb. And I was scared to death for my dad to come home, because I don't know how to change it. I'm a little kid. Yeah. And I mean, of all the places in that garage that ball could have gone, it hit the one light bulb sticking out the front. I don't think I could have done that if I threw it 100 times again.
Wow. Yeah, my dad was a coal miner his whole life, 30 years, and I used to remember, because my mom stayed at home, and when she said you got to wait till your dad gets home, man, was that a long that was the worst thing that a kid could be told back then.
Yeah, my mom, I had like a circular house.
Yeah.
And so when I got a little old enough to outrun her, I'd be like running around, like she's chasing me around and I
Yeah.
don't want to get smacked. So I'd run around and she'd be like, "You're either going to stop and let me smack you or you're going to wait for your dad to get home." And I'd just stop. Because
Yeah.
I mean,
It was
it
always
never
better for
hurt,
mom.
you know,
Yeah.
she just.
Yeah. Was baseball the only organized sport you played in school, or did you play anything else?
I played mostly baseball. One year I played football. One year I played football. I got in trouble because the coach was trying to put me in. I was a little chubby in junior high school. Like, you know how you put on that baby fat before you shoot up?
Yeah.
And I had a few friends like this, and right before you shoot up, you get that baby fat on you. So I wanted to play receiver because when we I would always quarterback or play receiver in my neighborhood pickup games.
Okay.
And I could catch really well, and I loved to play receiver, but they wouldn't let me because I was a little bigger, so they wanted me on the front line. And I hated playing the freaking front line. Like, I wanted no parts of it. And I tried to get them to at least let me play tight end, so maybe I got one pass a game or something.
Yeah.
And so I immediately disliked playing organized football because I did not want to play the front line. And one time the coach went to put me in, and I was talking to the cheerleaders, and I got in all kind of trouble because I would.
Oh man.
So that was the end of my organized football career. But I still, we still played a lot of pickup games into my 20s.
Yeah.
I played intramural in college. I quarterbacked our intramural team in college
Nice.
because I went to St. Vincent, so we didn't have a football team or anything. So intramurals was a big part of what we did, and that was fun.
Yeah. That's awesome. What position did you play in baseball for your school?
Well, I played outfield. 1 year, our catcher went down, and I'm a Clemente fan, Willie Mays fan. Like, I wanted to play the outfield, right?
Yeah.
And I always wanted to play right field because that's where Clemente played, and you needed a good arm to play right field, and that was my best trait, was my arm. And I love to throw people out and everything. And then I remember when I got older and moved into Pony League, and we got to play under the lights, and it was awesome. And they started me. I was a starting center fielder, and I felt on cloud nine at that point because they always put the best fielder in center.
Yeah.
So that was exciting for me. But one time when I think I was 12, and I was going to the All-Star team in the outfield and everything, and that's where I wanted to play. And our catcher got hurt, and I had this coach, and he was tough. He was a tough coach,
Yeah.
and he wanted to win, and he would do whatever it took to win. And he threw the catching material at me, and I'm like, "What are you doing? I don't catch." And he's like, "You're either catching or we're forfeiting." And all the other kids are looking at me, and I'm like, "All right, I guess I'm catching."
Oh my
And
gosh.
I remember somebody tried to steal on me, like in the first game, and I turned and I threw to third, and I threw like a strike, and then I was sold. I'm like, "Okay, I can catch." And yeah, so I went to the
Yeah.
All-Star game as a catcher that year.
That's cool.
But then I got to go back to the outfield, thank God, because I did
Yeah.
not. It was funny because shortly I had this guy, and I had two coaches, and they both played minor league baseball. And the one taught his son to pitch all kind of junk, right? And he was like 12, and we won everything because nobody could hit this kid. They would bail out and they'd come across the plate, and he had a fastball that was so slow, and so I just gave him the number 2 all the time. Number 2, number 2, number 2. I never gave him the number 1. So he threw that curveball, and people would bail out, and it would come right across the plate. It was so much fun. So one day he threw one, and it bounced, and it hit me in the groin. And I'm like on the ground, and it didn't hit me. It hit me in the leg, but everybody thought it hit me in the groin, and I'm rolling around in pain because my the back of my thigh was killing me. And the coach, I go to the bench, and he's like, "Here, you might want this," and he hands me a cup. Now this is how after I've been playing catcher half a season, and I'm like, "Well, now's a good time to give me that damn thing." Like, you should have given me that from day one, don't you think?
Yeah, that's wild. So I'd love to hear. I can remember some of my earliest memories of the first Pirate team I watched and the first Steeler team I watched. Do you remember like what season it was that you first started watching the Steelers and Pirates?
I don't remember the exact season, but the team I really remember watching a lot of was the '79 World Series team. That's the first year. Like I could still name you the starting lineup,
Mm.
their batting stances. Like that's the first year I really remember really watching every game.
The Lumber Company.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
Lumber Company actually started before that with Richie Zisk and Al Oliver.
Mm.
And then it's funny because, we probably had a better lineup before the '79 season with
Yeah.
Richie Zisk and Al Oliver in there. And Rennie Stennett was more of an everyday player. By '79, Al Oliver was gone from that team. Richie Zisk was gone from that team. And Phil Gardner was playing second base. They had converted him from third to second when he came to the Pirates from the A's. And Rennie Stennett he had an injury, so he was more of a backup and a pinch hitter by then, because he had a bad, I think it was a knee injury, but he was a real good hitter before that. And of course, holds the record for most hits in a 9-inning game with 7.
Hmm. Yeah. So sometimes we hear about your love for Lynn Swann. So, I mean, you grew up when the Steelers, I feel like the country was in a fever pitch. They had the 4 championships there in the '70s. Do you remember just 2 of them? Like, how many of the Steeler championships do you remember as a child, like getting to actually know what's going on, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I was so little for the first one, and I don't, I was playing with other kids, and I don't remember watching that one. I remember I could picture everybody sitting around watching the game, but I didn't, I was too little.
Yeah.
And I remember watching like all the games and watching every Super Bowl. That one I didn't watch a whole lot of, but the rest of them I did. But I was real little, and I don't remember a whole lot. The one I remember the most was the one against the Rams when John
Mm.
Stallworth caught those 2 bomb passes. And when I
Wow.
was growing up, the Steelers were larger than life. They were on all the TV ads. They were in movies like Hooper and Smokey and the Bandit. They were on every talk show. Bob Hope used to have those college All-Americans, and I remember watching that. Lynn Swann was on all kind of stuff. He was known for his ballet and his acrobatic catches, and there
Yep.
was no greater receiver once he left his feet. I mean, he was just unbelievable. And it always pains me to hear people talk smack on him because they just look at the numbers, the sheer numbers, which back then it wasn't a passing game.
Right.
But if you watch him day in and day out, or go back now and watch old games, you will see he was not only a brilliant acrobatic receiver, but he was also a possession receiver. And he was the top receiver in the league at the time he played. And none of those receivers are ever going to hold up. Cliff Branch was fantastic. Fred Biletnikoff, Harold Carmichael, Kenny Burrow. But they're never going to have the stats because, I always talk about when the Mel Blount rule came in, what happened? Steve Largent happened. Jerry Rice happened. You couldn't touch
Yeah.
the receiver anymore. Those
Yeah.
guys got their asses beat the whole way down the field. What George Atkins did and Jack Tatum did to Lynn Swann it would be a crime today. They'd get thrown out of the league. He would go over the middle. They'd try to take his head off. They intentionally try to hurt him.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy with how many like wide receivers get injured today. With how much, like you said, the guys back then, like Swan and them, they were Iron Men for what contact they were taking. It was unbelievable.
It's a totally different game, and that's why I always say that a lot of people will they want vintage football cards. They think they're undervalued, and I do too. But the problem is that sports fans, especially if you haven't seen guys play, only care about stats.
Right.
And you're just, since the rule changes and games added, you're
Oh yeah.
just never going to have stats. Like
Yeah.
OJ Simpson's the only guy to rush for 2,000 yards in a 14 game season,
Right.
right? Or in a 12 game season. Everybody else did it in 14 or more.
Yeah.
So, or I'm sorry, what was it? A 14 game season when he did it?
I think it
In
was 14.
14, but everybody else did it in a 16 game season. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little confused. But then you go back to Jim Brown, he played in 12 game seasons.
Right.
So how do you
Yeah.
compare Jim Brown to Walter Payton? So football has changed so much that the old guys just aren't going to be on the record books.
Yeah, well, it's sad, John, because they're going to add another game very soon. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think 1 or 2 more years. The commissioner's already pushing and pushing, and it's kind of sad to say, like Drew Brees and Tom Brady, their stats are going to fall. And it's
Well,
like
yeah, if
it's
you're
like they're
adding
never.
games, right?
It's crazy.
Well, if you look at all the top receivers and all the top quarterbacks over the last few years, like they've all retired more recently.
Yeah,
With Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, those kinds of guys. Uh, it's just it's a whole different it's a it's a whole different ball game stat wise and rule wise. You're never going to have probably any running back ever break the all time rushing mark ever again because they're such a small part of the modern game compared to
yeah,
the way they used to be. So it's impossible to compare eras in really any sport, but
yeah.
especially in football.
Football's the worst. So let's talk about you collecting as a child. So was there a certain person or family member or friend that you kind of got the card bug from that showed you their cards, or can you not even remember when you started loving sports cards?
No, I'm an only child, and one day my mom bought me some cards, and I sat on the floor, she said, and looked at them for hours, and she's like, "Wow, he likes cards," so she kept buying them for me. And so I had cards, and like I said, I had football cards and baseball cards. I specifically remember when I was real little, and I didn't know anything. I was so little, and I used to think the Saints were the Steelers, and I would put them together because they had the same color uniforms. I
Yeah,
couldn't tell them apart.
yeah.
Uh, and and then I had a neighbor girl who babysat me, and she was a little older, and she brought me a box of cards that predated the ones I had,
Yeah.
and I was just like hooked after that. And I wanted all the older ones that I didn't have before.
So yeah, I mean that's the most interesting part of your story because back then kids didn't, I don't think, collect the vintage. Like now you can watch a YouTube video and possibly be interested. So do you think that your babysitter's the one that actually got you hooked on going after vintage cards as a kid?
Well, I'll tell you, to some extent, because it was fascinating to see cards that were before the ones I bought. But
Yeah,
even though they were only like 1, 2, and 3 years before the ones I had, they weren't, you know, real old. At the time, they weren't vintage. They were from a
yeah,
couple years ago.
true.
But what it really was, and I did this on my own. Nobody, you know, I wasn't influenced by anybody. I just did it on my own because I was a huge baseball fan.
Yeah,
And I got this one book. I don't know if it's around here. I got I just want to share this. This
sure.
was one of the first books on vintage baseball I ever had. And I went through here and I would just read about all these old players. And I would go to that flea market, or if I could talk somebody into taking me to another flea market, and I would seek out all the players I learned about and read about in this book. And my friends, they didn't know who they were. You know, they're buying Steve Garvey and Gary Carter and those kinds of guys. And I bought them too, but I had them all because I bought packs every year, and I ended up with sets from, all those years. So when I went to the flea market, I wasn't interested in the cards I had and the modern players I already had. I was interested in all the old guys I read about and my dad told me about.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, I ended up with, before I was in high school, I ended up with an enormous vintage collection.
Did you have like Babe Ruth cards before you were in college? Did you have Ty Cobb cards, or you didn't have that
I didn't
crazy?
have those guys, but I had Jackie Robinson, Ted Williams, Clemente, Mantle, Mays, Aaron, all those guys.
Wow. Did you ever get lucky enough where a friend got his dad's collection because his dad's like, oh, these are just cards, and you got to
No,
trade for them or anything like that?
no. When I was little, we used to dream about that, because cards were worth something, but they
Yeah.
weren't, like today. And I remember being at my friend's house, and he had told me that his dad knew this old guy, and he had old cards, and he had Babe Ruth, and he had cards from the 30s, and I remember talking. We were just we were just hoping that this old guy would give us some of his cards. So I remember hearing stories like that, but I never had anybody that collected that ever gave me any. No,
Yeah.
other than
So,
my babysitter.
yeah. Did you ever have a bigger card? I know 52 Mantle is probably crazy, but did you ever have a bigger card that you traded? Like even in your 20s, did you ever have a bigger card that now you regret it?
Yes, when I was young, and I didn't have a lot of money, and it used to make me nervous to hold on to cards that were worth a lot of money. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
and there were times in collecting where it looked like, it was hard to give cards away at times. Like they weren't selling for very much. A
Yeah.
lot of the old tobacco cards, I got for under $100. Sometimes you can get them for 30 some bucks. A lot of the old cards that I thought should be worth a ton of money. I remember when I bought my 53 Satchel Page, I couldn't believe, it wasn't a lot of money. And so when I had some Babe Ruths that I would sell, and some other big cards, because I didn't know if they'd hold their value or not. And I always was nervous to have them. I
Hmm.
don't know why.
Yeah.
Um, I grew out of that, but there was a time, and I know Dylan Double D. He has said the same thing. He used to be nervous to hold expensive cards.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was like that, but I was.
Hmm.
So I sold off some cards I wish I had back. Most of them I did pick up later on. I got another copy. Um,
Yeah. I think you said you've never actually owned a 52 Mantle because you always felt like it was overpriced, right?
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And growing up, Mantle wasn't one of the guys we really sought after too much.
Yeah.
We were more into Clemente, Mays, and Aaron, um, and some of the older players. Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb.
Yeah.
I was more likely to buy a Satchel Page back then than a Mantle. So
Well,
it just wasn't something that I sought. And by the time I would have wanted one, it was already expensive.
yeah. Well,
I mean, the one that sold for 12.5 million, I think, wasn't it like 1990? He paid 90,000 for it or something. They were never cheap.
right. Right. Yeah. They always seemed expensive for the time period. I kind of
Yeah,
agree with
for
that.
the time period. That's right.
Yeah.
For the time period.
So if there's a kid watching this and he collects modern, and he's thinking about going into vintage, but he's just kind of doesn't know what to do. Like, what advice would you give a kid that's thinking about going the vintage route
What
today?
advice?
Yeah, today.
Well, number one, read up on baseball, study all the Hall of Famers, get some books, learn about who you would be collecting. And number two, you know, pick up a standard catalog of baseball cards and start reading up on all the different sets. They're all there. I know there's many other places you can go to get information. You can go online, sure, but that's a book that you'll learn by accident because everything's right there at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And I would certainly like get Beckett Vintage. Beckett Vintage, you learn about all kind of sets and players, um, and that's what I always did. I would get any literature I could get my hands on and look through it and study that standard catalog of vintage baseball cards. Just go through there all the time. When I'm sitting around and just start looking through there and start reading up on the sets and how they were distributed and that kind of thing. Get a checklist. Um, you can't be too educated. It all starts with education,
Yeah.
and then
Yes.
it also starts with your interests. You know,
Yeah.
I would assume if you're going to start in vintage cards that you have an interest in it. If you don't, you might not want to start with vintage cards. Not everybody has to collect vintage,
Right.
but if you have an interest in it, then I think you need to educate yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I've seen collectors jump into vintage, and they kind of like you said they kind of dive in without doing education, and then 3 years, 5 years down the road, they're selling those cards they bought originally. Either maybe they didn't look at the condition of the card, and now they have a different eye, or maybe they don't like that
Yeah,
player as much, or like it really feels like sometimes people dive in head first and maybe pay prices that they shouldn't be paying for a card that's not worth that much. So I think it's really good advice. So
and you hit on something interesting because when I was little, you couldn't be picky. There wasn't eBay. You couldn't plug in 1952 Yogi Berra and pick from 100 different ones, the one you wanted for the right price, the right condition. So, I ended up with a lot of cards that, looking at them in today's eye, well, this is drastically off center, but I never noticed it. I didn't care. It was the only one I ever saw when I bought it. If I saw the card, I bought it. I wasn't that particular about condition because I might not see it ever again when I was growing up. So, that's a good point there. The other thing I want to say is don't be afraid to make some mistakes. And what I mean by that is, I sometimes just buy up some common players that are inexpensive, some old vintage cards that are raw. So you know what they look like, what they feel like, what they smell like, and start to educate yourself that way. And so you pick up cards. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. If you want a nicer copy later, get a nicer copy, sell that copy. But, it's worth it. It's worth a few extra bucks. It's worth a few mistakes to start to learn about these things. Today, because we collect slabs and not cards, you never touch a card. You never see a card. You don't know what it feels like. You don't know the thickness. You don't know what it smells like. You don't know anything about the card. So you'll never be educated. You'll never know what it's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to feel like, and you might miss out on some great opportunities. We can look at it time and time again. You look at the Grail collection that's being shown all over YouTube. They're all grading, aren't they? They're all grading. And if you're afraid of raw, or you don't know what you're looking at, or you see it on Ty's show, Chasing Cardboard. If you're totally afraid to buy those things, you may miss out on some great stuff. Those Babe Ruths that are grading 4.5s because you don't know what a card looks like.
Right, but I just want to make a point to you, and I'm curious to see your opinion on it. I have a theory that 10 years down the road, if you see an ungraded card that's worth more than $500, you should run. Because it either was cracked out because something was wrong with it, it's fake, it's been cleaned. Like, are we going to hit that point where your alarm bells are going off in your head? Why is this $1,000 card not great?
It's gonna boil down to the provenance, right? Like you see these people finding these cards in attics or in barns of people in that right age group that had these things, never graded them, had them stored away. So it's going to be, about the provenance. Like if somebody inherits my cards, I think you're more likely to not have fakes there. Or I shouldn't say fakes, trimmed. 99.9% of cards have never been faked. I don't worry about fakes. I worry about alterations. That's what I worry about. For the most part, there are some cards you need to stay away from because unscrupulous people have made a lot of fakes of them and they're easy to make. But for the most part, I think you're right when it comes to alterations and so forth. We're coming to the point now, and there's so many unscrupulous sellers. So they're not going to disclose to you that PSA kicked it back. They're going to sell it raw. And it's probably going to come to that. And that's a shame. It's depressing to me, but you're right. It'll probably come to that because I think now more than ever, as we move forward, you can trust raw less and less and less. And I've always been an advocate that you can trust most raw. And the examples I just cited were tons of raw. The Mickey Mantle that sold for $12.5 million was raw right before it sold for that. So, but I think you're right.
No.
And there's just too, again, it goes back to ego and greed. Those are the two things that rule this hobby right now: ego and greed.
Yeah, I agree. So, last but not least, I don't know if you've ever stayed till the end, but I asked 10 questions in 1 minute. Are you up for the challenge?
Sure. I have to answer them like first thing off the top of my head kind of thing?
Yes. So here's the timer. I'm going to flip this over once I ask you the first question. Okay?
Okay. All right.
And none of them are like, this is the question, why is that your answer? So you don't have to go into details, okay?
Okay.
All right. Bill Madlock used to play Pepper with two bad boys. If you could play Pepper with two other YouTubers, who would they be?
Pepino Man and Dave Blue Jacket 66.
What's the best 1960s top set?
1960.
Can the Pirates win a World Series with Nutting as owner?
No.
Will you ever own your Will you ever own your own dojo?
No.
What one word describes you best?
Eccentric.
Best beach in America.
Best what?
Beach in America. Beach.
Fort Lauderdale.
Dream card you don't own.
T206 Hannes Wagner.
Do cat owners get a bad rap in America?
That's not an easy yes, no. They used to, not so much anymore.
What do you order at the Dairy Queen?
Peanut butter parfait, of course.
Oh, that's great. Can Man O' War beat Seabiscuit in a race?
Yes, but not Secretariat.
Oh yeah, I did. I messed that up. Secretariat.
I knew what you meant.
I messed up the dojo question, so I'll give you a break on that one. I had some bad handwriting there. So, man, John, this was a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you sitting down with me and answering my questions.
Thanks for having me on, man. I hope I wasn't too direct.
No, it was good. All right, well, thanks everybody for watching. I'm sure you already subscribed to John's channel. If you're not, I'll have a link down below for it, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.